Hello again, and welcome everyone to another episode of Doctors Schuster and Oxley, the Power of Stories podcast. As advertised in our last podcast, which was a retrospective of 2025, we thought we'd do this partner episode on 2026 predictions, perhaps. As you can see, I have had a makeover. The hair has been cut, I've been groomed, I've got new glasses. So it's a little bit of a dangerous episode, though, to make predictions. There are lots of stories of people over the past, the famous one being the patent clerk in the US who declared in 1899 that everything that has been invented has now been invented back in 1899. Clearly, he didn't see the advent of the internet or artificial intelligence. Over the past year, we've watched AI become a colleague. Talking about AI, return to office policies have sparked existential debates. Perfectly capable professionals quietly wonder whether they're still relevant. Skills-based hiring is rising. Career ladders are wobbling. A reinvention is taking place. And Helmut and I have slightly different views about the speed with which this is all happening. So with this backdrop, we thought, why don't we focus this episode on our predictions for 2026? To end the intro with a couple of quotes, because I kind of like that. Peter Drucker, who is Helmut's personal hero, I think, famously put it, the best way to predict the future is to create it, which I think is a lovely quote. Alvin Toffler warned long ago that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I think that's a very, very good quote. If that's true, then 2026 is not just another year, it's a professional inflection point. And this is our point of contention as to how much of an inflection point it is. Since Helmut and I have somewhat different views on this, what might be interesting is for us to just ask a few questions and then go through it and get our different perspectives. 2026, what do you think are going to be the big influences over professional life?
Okay, David, thank you so much for the intro. Great, as always, great quotes. Just one thing, Firstly, hello from Vienna. I'm in Vienna today, which is lovely. We have snow. It's freezing cold. And Vienna, on November 1909, had a young person named Peter Drucker be born in Vienna. Not sure if everyone knows that, but Peter Drucker was born in Vienna, November 1909, and that's why I'm in big admiration that he made it from Vienna to America to become one of the biggest management gurus ever. Yeah, but the other thing, David, can I just start or kick it off with the big trends I see occurring in 26 and then actually basically go to careers or the implication for careers. So I do see 2026 pretty much a continuation of like 25. AI is going to be a very, very big topic in 2026. But I also believe 2026 will show us much better what AI can do, what it can't do. And I think it will give us a more realistic sense of reality in terms of how long this is going to take. I do believe AI is going to transform the world, but not as fast as most people think it will. And I think we're going to see this in the stock markets. I don't see a huge correction, but I do see volatility. I do believe a bit more transparency around like where will AI actually create huge benefits initially, productivity gains, and as I think this is going to emerge in 2026. I also believe that companies are going to be very, very reluctant to hire people. I think we're going to see a very conservative approach to hiring. I think we're going to see that in the US job data. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and that also is quite important for people and their careers. And anything you want to add to that, David, to the first question? Any big mega trend I missed?
It's hard to disagree with those predictions. And I think the trick here, going back to the whole patent clerk story, is that I think when you make predictions of where we're going to be in 2035 or 2040, it becomes very difficult because there are too many variables. Flying cars or, the idea of robots as domestic servants in the house. And some of these things may be true, some of them not. They're very difficult. But I think when you look at it just in 12 months, I think as you just said, Helmut, I think it's reasonably, it's within our, I think there's probably a 60-70% probability that you can say with some accuracy, these are the trends that are going to have the big influences. I think this question of regulatory change, of borders, of protectionism, tariffs, I mean, are there any aspects of that you think, it does feel like there are aspects of the old alliances and the old world orders that are shifting, maybe subtly, but does that change or does that have an influence, do you think? I think you touched upon.
Well, basically, I think the big world order is not going to change quickly in 2026. So, as I said, I think we're going to see continuation. I do believe at the end of the day, it's all about economics. With all the AI, the power needs are going to triple. So we need three times as much electricity and power as we currently have. Yeah. So that means we need to have a lot of resources. So even America, with their huge oil reserves, could not provide for that power to become the leading nation in AI. And so I think when we talk about AI, we always need to keep in mind it's all about energy at the end of the day. It's all about energy and metals. And I think every head of state must be thinking about that right now. So I think this is what...
Let me bridge that a little bit. And in a way, it's a segue to the careers. But we've written a couple of articles over the space of the last 12 or 18 months about mega trends and the idea that these mega trends are the way I sort of view it is if you think of professional life as having sort of a series of lakes, some of the lakes are slowly evaporating and others are sort of growing. And if you have the choice, you'd rather be a boat on one of the lakes that is growing. But are there other mega trends that you see having an influence over professional life in 2026?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think the third mega trend is basically education. I think education is going to be available to the masses. I think AI and technology and learning is not going to be a privilege of the rich. And I think that's quite important because I do think companies will not be able to afford to only hire people with MBAs or MAs or bachelors from elite universities. And I think that's going to be a huge change going forward. It's a huge opportunity about social mobility, but that's going to be a mega trend that's going to play out over many, many years, not only next year, but over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to be really interesting because it's a profound change for companies. So companies will have to rethink how they hire. And I think that's a big thing. And we're going to see that, I believe, in 2026. Yeah. The other thing for careers, I think it's going to be really, really hard. Companies will be very reluctant to hire many new people to the job market. I think, and I talk to many young people and they just get it. Yeah? So I talked to Zach, who works for me. He's like 22. He does a SEMS degree. He's now in Dublin. So it's basically his master's. And he's really worried about his career because he said he finds it very hard to get an internship. There's no job without an internship. And he's a very good student, by the way. He's a very good student. He speaks many languages, lived around the globe, but he's worried. And I see that how many young people in the early 20s who are not part of the profession, that they see how consultancy don't hire as many people as they used to. That companies in their trainee programs don't hire as many people because many of these jobs, many of these positions are really going to be filled by AI. And I think that's a reality. We're going to see that. Yeah? And I think
before we get on to what people should do about it, let me pose a couple of other questions for you. So other mega trends, the aging demographic, many more people living longer, requiring medical services into their 70s, 80s, 90s. So there's a quality of life existence on that. You see that as a mega trend. We talked about energy. We haven't really talked about CO2, clean energy, so much as the need for more energy without necessarily the suggestion of there being.
Yeah, I do believe.
Robotics is another one that we hear about all the time. We hear about entertainment because people have theoretically more free time because AI is going to mean that you have more work automated and therefore more personal free time. And then you did talk about the growth in education, but touched on that is the more connectivity. There's a report that says in 1980 there were 500,000 dial-up internet connections, and today there are over 3 billion broadband internet connections. And so the connectivity of the world and how, as a population, we have more ability to converse in real time is a trend that is somewhat indisputable. So do you see any of those having a significant influence
Well,
in 26?
I think 26, but I think the biggest mega trend of all is, and we just need to acknowledge that, is we see a movement from north to south, because that's where the population growth is, yeah? And we see a move from the west to the east, yeah? And this is the biggest mega trend that will play out over the next 20, 30, 40 years, yeah? So I think we need to understand that, yeah? So when we talk about mega trends, yeah, we should not be focused on like regional mega trends, yeah, because like most of the AI is currently trained in English, yeah. Just we need to understand that in English, yeah, and English is not the most spoken first language. We also need to understand that, yeah, and is trained from via the internet or knowledge which is available, which is most in English and Western, yeah. So everything we see is very much like, but we live in a global world. But I do believe the other mega trend is, I think robots we've been talking about that for like the last 20 years. I think we're going to see robots not being able to do your dishes or chores at home for many, many years. I do believe the energy transition will take place. But I think the replacement ratio is not as quickly as people think. Because the key thing is our electricity growth demand is going to accelerate exponentially as a result of the need to have data centers. So I think energy, clean energy is going to grow enormously. I think solar is going to be the big winner over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Wind will have a comeback, but I still believe proportionally to hydrocarbons, it's not going to move that quickly as we thought, because there's just too much energy demand globally on this planet the next 20, 30 years. But we will see solar, wind, inroads. We will have all sorts of mix because the world needs clean energy. There's no question about that.
So these subjects are great contextually to then bridge into careers, because understanding the moving parts gives you a sense of careers in certain industries are probably going to do better than others. You hear a lot about career ladders, the old career ladders, the idea of a pyramid and how artificial intelligence is fragmenting this. It's taking rungs out of the ladder. And so this comes back a little bit to the conversation that you were starting there about big corporations maybe not hiring in the same numbers, thinking about consolidating around their existing headcount, reducing their headcount. When we talk about the implications to careers, that I sort of push back to you a little bit is, so what do you think happens to careers, jobs in 2026 that might be distinct from 2025?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I think it's going to be harder to get a job. I think it's going to be much harder to get a promotion. Yeah, these are the two things. The worst thing you can do is actually be demotivated by that. It's just a fact of life. I think we're going to see a lot of more, and we wrote about that, job hugging. I think people are going to be very reluctant to leave their jobs, because people do realize that it's going to be very, very difficult to land in another better job because everyone is downsizing. So I think that's very important. I think we are not going to see big breakthroughs in terms of like new job creation. I think there will be new areas. I think we will need more people to really, and I said that before, I think there will be more people who need to think about like really doing prompts for AI. I think there are many people in education who teach that. I think the education sector is going to explode because people really want to have it easy to understand how to use this thing. So we're going to see that exploding. But, and this is the key thing, and nothing has ever changed, if people are good, and we need to understand that, yeah, young people will find jobs if they've good attitude, if they basically have good work ethics, and if they can demonstrate this good work ethics in interviews. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, for people who've been in the corporate arena for a bit longer, and I get many questions where people say, "I'm really worried. What am I going to do if I'm being laid off?" And the only thing I can tell people is great work ethics, good attitude, basically adaptability, but also continuous education. Yeah, I think this is so important that people understand. If I don't understand the basics of coding, if I don't understand the basics of how AI actually works, I would be worried. Yeah, I would be
So
really, really worried.
let me pick up on a couple of those things. One of in a way, this question of thinking about how careers are built. There is a trend that thinking about yourself as a label, like a accountant or a lawyer or a HR professional. These labels, we wear them like a cloak, but they become somewhat restrictive because the labels become who we think we are, and they lead to this. They're a component that feeds job hugging. We get comfortable in that space and we protect ourselves. So as you say, we've written a couple of articles. You had one in the Observer last year, which was very well received. How do you think might be a healthier way to frame that?
I think the best way to frame is to really understand and reflect on what you're good at. You might have labeled yourself as HR professional, but then you realize what you're really good at is advising people or advising your bosses or advising the CEO on reward issues or on learning. And I think it's really important because HR is so broad and there are many things. Be very clear and specific. What do you believe makes you stand out amongst the crowd? And I find it sometimes shocking when I talk to people and only ask them, so what are you really good at? Blank. People cannot answer the question. They have no idea, but they do not know the USP, do not know the USP. So the first, really recommendation to everyone is figure out what is your USP. And if you don't know it, ask your friends. Yeah, they probably find it easy to tell you.
I think this is so important. So would you say that as we enter 2026, how would you help people frame that? Is that part of what you were saying?
Well, yeah, that's what I was part of saying. But I think there's one thing I also want to go back to is that because you talked about hierarchies and how is that changing. I do not believe that hierarchies are ever going to go away. I still remember I read a book called Megatrends, and they basically declared, there was a guy called Nisbet. He said it's the end of large corporations. And now with larger corporations than ever and more hierarchies. I believe human nature is about being in hierarchy. So career ladders will exist, I think, as long as companies and business and the world exists, because that's the way people like to organize themselves. They need it. So I think that's not going to change. But I think what is going to change in a very significant way, that I was yesterday in a podcast, in a panel conversation, and they had like two CEOs and one CFO of significant FTSE companies in the UK. And it was really interesting, refreshing to hear that they all said like the superpower, what's really important is, to give very, very straight feedback and direct feedback, And so I think people also need to think about that. How can I just start thinking about? You stand out if you know more than your peers. There was a very specific example where the CEO said, she said, well, what is really important to me is that my HR director does not only talk to me about HR. I want my HR director to talk about like much broader things, such as world strategy, politics. I need a thought partner. And I think that's really, really important. We're going to see more of that. Leaders really respect people who can help them to get better, help them in decision-making processes, coming up with solutions. I think that's a very, very big trend in 26 that we're going to see more and more where you have to proactively think about solutions rather than like living in your hierarchy bubble and expect orders. I think that's going to change, and it's not possible anymore, the way this world is going to be organized.
Okay, so let's bridge into the sort of wrap up of the main session here. Advice for people just starting their career. So
just one thing. Just one thing, David, before. We talked about USP. So what is your USP? What do you think your USP is?
My USP, that's
you make the point. Most people don't realize how great they are because your superpower is really getting things done. Your ability to execute is unmatched, And I think the reason I wanted to bring that in is getting things done is going to be the superpower of 26, and people don't realize that, I see a huge shift, where executives, senior executives, don't really require complete loyalty anymore. Yeah, they want loyalty to the company, loyal to the bigger cause. But what they also want is actually direct feedback. Yeah, and people who get things done. Yeah, on their own. Yeah, that they don't always ask for permission, get things done. And I think that's going to see a big change. And I think people are currently not trained and educated in the way to really sort out problems and get things done. So I think that's a big message to everyone.
I don't know it's a superpower. It seems to me like almost just common sense.
Well, common sense is a superpower. 9% of the world population does not have common sense.
What is your
It's a
superpower,
reality.
Herr Schuster?
I think it's being pragmatic. I think my superpower is being hugely pragmatic. And a dear old friend you know very well by the name of Steve Davis, he once told me, being pragmatic is the most important quality you have. I was obviously very disappointed. I thought, well, you have a PhD and all these things, that your pragmatism is what really counts. And I figured, well, that is very disappointing. It was anticlimax, but I now understand what he actually meant. Taking pragmatic decisions and getting ultimately things done. I think that basically we have in common, trying to get things done. Input-output equation.
Okay, so if you were thinking of framing a tip or a series of tips, I'm not going to limit you to one.
Okay,
what's the one career tip that you would give to someone about to graduate college or entering the workplace for the first time? How can they be more successful in 2026 than they might otherwise be?
Well, the one career tip, and I still remember, I've been given that to generations of trainees in BP and graduates: don't be difficult. So if there's one tip I give to every person on the planet, do not be difficult. And that might sound very, very basic, but most people are very difficult. So that's the first career tip. Yeah, don't be difficult. The second career tip is try to understand, and gather input from people around you. Be very, very self-aware. Be very, very self-aware. And the third thing is actually that's very important. Yeah, make sure you listen more than you actually talk, especially in an interview. And that's for people who are going to interview in 26 for a job. If you get the interviewers to talk more than you're probably going to get the job. Try to ask questions, be interested, know the company, inform yourself, and ask questions, and get the people interviewing you to talk more than you. And your probability to get the job or the promotion is increased significantly. Try it out.
So perhaps I can just ask you a little bit about in a way, I think people have thought about careers in a singular sense. I have a job today, and that job has a natural succession to it. As we've come across lots of people in the Gen Z population, there's much more willingness to do multiple things. Now, we often preach prioritization and focus. Are careers becoming more pluralistic? Is that somehow a trend that's irresistible? And how would we reconcile it with the idea of prioritization and focus?
Yeah, I think that, David, that's really brilliant question, because I don't believe that people actually, or this generation, does more than the previous generation. You need to one thing like the boomers probably had at the time when they were 25, 3 babies, 3 kids. So that was a job. Yeah, there was lots to do. I think we all have the same amount of time available in any given day, and I think this generation, Gen Z, basically does other things than previous generations did. Yeah. So they spend more time now on Robinhood trading, and you might say much of their other activities are more business and commercial centric than in previous generation. Now you do a lot of day trading, you create your little startup because your friends do it, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. I think you need to do something outside your main job which gets you money. And I think that's a beautiful strength of this generation. They all do many things at the same time, which at the end of the day benefits the company they're working for. So that's not a bad thing.
Mm.
And I think when you think how many young people now influencer on Instagram or the TikToks or whatever, yeah, I think it's not a bad thing. Yeah. So I do believe the do many things, but I think that's not completely new, yeah? They just do different things than the previous generation did.
Well,
Does
then
that make
let's
sense?
move on to your, yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the
Yeah.
final question we said that we would discuss, which is that we've talked about the one career tip or the career tips for the generation just entering the workplace. What about people mid-career? What about people who've been in the professional work environment for 10 or 20 years? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I mean, the advisors don't. I think the key, and we wrote that about many times, reflect very carefully whether you are burned out or bored out. Yeah, because I think many people have been in the same job and had many conversations the last weeks and months. Yeah, where people said, I've been in my job now for 2 and 3 years, great company, but I'm a bit bored. Yeah, so my career tip is, yeah, I would not advise to simply quit your job, but I think it's not going to be that easy. Yeah, to find a job. Yeah, I mean, I'm just real here. Yeah, I would rather advise people and try to figure out, have a conversation, how you could enrich your current job to your own benefit, but also the benefit of the company. I think experience is, and that might be a mega trend they should have, is going to be valued more and more in the years to come. I really believe experience is the one thing AI cannot offer. Yeah. So my advice to people, just make sure that you learn a bit more technology. Yeah. If you're bored in your job, try to find like something else to do inside the company, outside the company. Don't stand still. Do not stand still. I think that's very key. The other thing is, which is very important, don't feel obliged to stay in your office or in on your desk, yeah, if you have nothing to do. Time has come where we don't have to pretend to be busy to keep our jobs. And I think this is the conversation, the big conversation to be had. And I think it's risk-free because leaders know the great people. If you identify yourself as saying, listen, don't have enough work to do, but I would like to do that. Can I do that? I think that's always hugely respected by team leaders and companies.
I think that's well said. I think the only thing that I might add, and perhaps you've got a perspective on this, is that I think it's important to be looking ahead to where and having active dialogue either with yourself, if you've got a good relationship with your manager, your leader, a mentor, colleagues, friends. Where's the industry going over the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you want to position yourself? The sad thing is, a lot of people that I've had conversations with over the last 3 or 4 years who have found themselves victims of a big redundancy or downsizing didn't see it coming. And so there are questions that I have for people that say, were you really actively engaged in discussing that, thinking about it? It is possible that sometimes companies hit crises that were unforeseen. But a lot of the time, I think the writing is on the wall and people choose not to see it. And I think if you're always investing in where you want to be 3 to 5 years from now in terms of improving your skills or having the ambition to look, going back to your point about bore out versus burnout, if there are senses of stagnating where you are, that's a great reason to start to look beyond where you are. I think we talk in our third book about reinvention every minimum 5 years, but potentially increasingly more frequently than that. I think these are healthy things. The minute you stop doing those things, I think you become vulnerable. So would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I just 100% agree with that. And there's one thing you said, which I think is very important. Nobody should ever be surprised not to have a job, because it can happen anytime, any year to anyone. We just need to understand that. Yeah. So it's our job, yeah, in companies to just always have a plan B and think about a plan B. I think it's so important that you're always prepared every 2 or 3 years, just test the market, but you should always be prepared. You never see it coming. I don't believe that anyone in Meta saw, like 3 years ago, the big headcount reduction coming in Meta's universe, yeah, and it will come over and over and over again, yeah. So I think every person working for a company, not themselves, should be always prepared, yeah, that this year might be my last year. I think that's just a fact of life.
Okay. All right. Well, that's our 2026 predictions for careers and professional life. As a wrap, I think we end these podcasts with a familiar little closeout. Anything to say before I do that, Helmut?
No, I just love your glasses. I think I'm gonna go to get some color onto my face as well. I think it's very nice, and I think you're a perfect host, David. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to this latest episode from Dr. Schuster and Oxley. Stay tuned because we have some exciting guests lined up over the space of the next month or two. We will be joined at our next episode by a guest that I won't declare just yet, but we're excited to discuss their story with them. If you enjoyed this podcast, let me invite you to check out our other podcasts. We have now nearly 20 episodes up on our platform. We also have a very active Instagram and LinkedIn presence. We have a wonderful monthly newsletter, which is a joy to write and read, if I say so myself. Helmut's favorite thing that he forces me to say at the end of every podcast is, if you enjoyed this discussion with Drs. Schuster and Oxley, you will love, not just enjoy, but you will love the 3 books that we currently have out, which I will share with you here. Let me close simply by saying thank you to Helmut Schuster. A happy new year, Helmut Schuster. I hope 2026 is a really good year for you.
Servus und auf Wiedersehen von mir in German. Tschüss. Bye.